Ed, why don't we talk about some of your favorite photos from your career? I mean, you've shot thousands of rolls of film, but there's some that stand out.
Yeah, I guess the first photo is a photo of me at 15 years of age with my Nikon and my Hasselblad camera, and people see that, and you know, Hasselblad was a camera they took to the moon, and they go, wow, that's a nice gear for a 15-year-old kid. Well, trust me, I was camera poor, as they say. I actually have the tally sheet from my mom for my Nikon. I put so much money down, and then my mom and dad loaned me money to get the camera, and then I paid them off every week from my job. And I've got that tally sheet with her handwriting. I mean, the original tally sheet. I've never thrown that away. And the same thing with the Hasselblad and all that. And when it came to like buying lenses for the Hasselblad, I would read the newspaper and find some doctor or attorney who bought this gear, and then they come to find out they really weren't a photographer. And you know, you can still find that stuff today, really, to be quite honest. People get excited, they're going to go out and get it, you know, and then they all of a sudden they find out they're not going to use it or whatever. And so I was buying a lot of that stuff used from people who had made buying mistakes. And so I was working my rear end off and selling pictures and working a job and all that. And so that picture was taken in turn one at Ontario Motor Speedway. And the fellow over my back shoulder was a lifelong friend of mine. He just passed away about 2 years ago, Dale Von Trebra, another mentor, friend, fellow shooter, motorsports photographer. And I think the picture of me was shot by another, well, I know it was shot by another friend of mine, but they didn't put their name on the back of the print when they gave me the print. So I can't honestly say for sure who shot that picture, unfortunately. The next picture, this one here, is shot just a few years ago by another friend of mine when I was shooting a picture at Daytona during the Rolex 24, because I still shoot. I love it. I still shoot. I still, you know, sell pictures for whatever, and cover racing events from Le Mans to Indianapolis to the Rolex 24 to whatever else. And you know, they captured me using one of my Leica cameras, and which I very much love. You know, the images that come out of those cameras. A picture that everybody is always drawn to, one of them is this picture here of Herm Peterson doing a fire burnout. And a lot of people who don't know racing or whatever go, oh my God, what happened in that picture? Well, what happened was it was a stage shot. And back then, for people who were around drag racing back in that era, they knew that we were staging these fire burnouts. There's an argument on who did the first one. Garlitz says he does. I'll go with that. Don Garlitz, Big Daddy. And it was an accidental thing where it caught the traction compound on fire, etc. Well, it went from that to, wow, what would happen if we started pouring gas down? I mean, seriously. I mean, and boom, these giant flames like you see in this picture. And so, you know, we went down, and I called a friend of mine, Jer Al-Hadif, fellow photographer, primarily shot only drag racing. And he was very tight with a magazine called Drag Racing USA, who I also sold pictures to. And I said to Jer, because the angle I shot on that picture was not for a cover, and I wasn't shooting at the angle for a cover. But I told Jer, I said, if you want to shoot this, because knowing that it would make a great cover shot. And so he came down and he shot more of a head-on angle, and it ended up on the cover of Drag Racing USA. And so I was shooting the image for a poster that we were going to produce, because Herm Peterson was one of our Justice Brothers sponsored cars. So We get down to the drag strip, and first of all, they tell us, do not use gasoline, okay, if you're going to do a fire burnout, because gasoline and asphalt are not a good mix.
Right.
It
breaks
erodes.
it down.
It just destroys it. And we said, of course, we would not use gasoline. We're going to use alcohol. Well, alcohol during the daytime is an invisible flame,
Right.
okay? And at night, it's sort of clear. And you don't get the beautiful yellow, orange, red, black smoke that you get off of gasoline, because gasoline has a lot more oil in it. It's not an aromatic, as we say, with alcohol. So we, of course, pour down several gallons of gasoline.
Of course you do.
You know, and this person's off camera. They're the gas person, and they also have the matches. And when they pour the gas down, they fire up the dragster. He comes, he rolls into the gasoline. When he gets into the gasoline, the guy throws the match, and so it's fuming off, and woof, you know, I mean, it's just, so you get a pretty good this, and then the flames die down to a certain level. Once it's lit, then somebody signals to the driver, boom, he hits the accelerator and throws the gas up into the air, and this giant fireball that you get is just there for like that. The next shot is another top fuel dragster, and that's Jerry Ruth. And this is just sort of a, in my opinion, a very iconic, typical burnout. The tires are narrowed up. He's got the standard breathing apparatus of that era. This is the late 60s, early 70s. And that was shot at Orange County Drag Strip, clearly one of the greatest drag strips that was ever built in the history of the sport. At that era, in Southern California, we had Irwindale, Orange County, Lyons down in Long Beach, and then we'd have Pomona on certain occasions. There would be a drag race every weekend, and we had enough cars here locally, top fuel cars and funny cars, that we could run major events every weekend. So I, like the other photographers, would be traveling from track to track to track after I didn't have that weekly riding job at Irwindale, and I could travel the other tracks. So there was a lot of time for me as a young photographer to hone my skill. You know, the more you shoot, the better you get. And that's just the way it is.
By the way, Ed, before we move on to the next picture, what made Orange County Drag Strip so good? Well,
it was really just beautifully built. It had a beautiful tower where you could go up on top of the roof. It was, you know, it was located amongst those orange groves down in Orange County. Orange County was a farm. This was on part of the Irvine Farm at that time. It was just, there was no expense spared. Irwindale, you know, nice, and Harry Snyder, the founder of In-N-Out, was involved in Irwindale financially. A lot of people don't know that. It was nice, but it was located in a gravel pit area. And Lyons, which was a fantastic drag strip, unbelievable history there. It was down towards the beach, and that's why its nickname was the Beach, and down by Terminal Island. And it was not the pretty. I mean, I have pictures where you get the high tension lines in the back, but that was part of the color of Lyons. But Orange County was just a Taj Mahal. I mean, that signage they had, and they had a sign that would show the speed in each and which lane at the starting line. I mean, that was just so way ahead of its time.
Now, Lyon, as I understand it, was built in more or less an easement from the railroad.
Yeah, Lyons was on a weird strip.
Yeah.
It was a weird strip. They didn't have a lot of space.
Right.
They had the rollers to start the cars. Mm-hmm. Lyons Drag Strip was an animal of its own.
Mm-hmm. I would love to have seen it, though. I mean,
yeah, it was. Well, I mean, Lyons was cold. The strip could be very wet because it was by the coast.
Sure.
The cars would go like this down there. It had limited shutoff. Cars would go into the sand trap. Yeah, a lot of history there. I mean, it was a great track. This next picture is of the Winter Nationals, and this goes back to when it was completely different. This is when it was really more on the parking lot at Pomona Fairgrounds, which it's still in the same location, but they've moved the starting line back. In this picture, the starting line's much farther forward. The cars were going much slower back then. They didn't need the shut-off space. Now they don't even do a quarter of a mile. They had moved the starting line back farther, and now with the starting line back farther, they've shortened it to 1,000 feet, so they don't even do a quarter of a mile. So that track, has changed quite a bit from this photograph over the years. And of course, there's a guy in the foreground here that you see in this picture. He's got an Irwindale Raceway jacket on, which a lot of people would be loved to have one of those original jackets today. Well, the next photo I pull up here is a picture of A.J. Foyt sitting in his car at Ontario Motor Speedway, and that's Jack Starn, his crew chief, that is checking something in the engine. Both very good friends of mine. Interestingly enough, when I went to attend A.J.'s father's funeral, A.J. asked me the night before the funeral when we were at his house, my dad and I with another couple, asked me if I would shoot pictures of his dad's funeral the next day. I had not brought a camera, so we went into a closet of AJ's. He said, "Oh, I got cameras," and he did. He had quite a few cameras, and I picked a camera and I shot pictures of his dad's funeral the next day and
Quite an honor.
gave him the film. Yeah, look, it's something you only do if you're asked. Okay, otherwise you don't really take a camera to, hey, can I get a picture of you standing, I mean, yeah.
Now, Ed, that's a really unusual car.
Yeah, it's an Indy car. It's of the eras. It's about 19, I think maybe 70, this picture was taken. And AJ's sitting in the car. He doesn't have gloves on. At that time, he was driving with golf gloves, thin leather. He'd buy a left and a right, and that would make his driving gloves. He liked to be able to feel the car. Fireproof gloves were available at that time. AJ had been involved in a fire at that time. Prior to that time, he knew the danger, but AJ in his career was involved in some pretty horrific crashes. 1965. Probably the worst. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he was dead that day at Riverside in Turn 9, and but then made it to Indy, within a few months, and had he did 35 straight Indy 500s. I mean, it's a record that will never be broken.
Really impressive.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a neat shot. This next one, another icon, another good friend, Mickey Thompson. And this is at Irwindale, and this was at a funny car, Top Fuel meet, and that's the monocoque funny car. Mickey was never afraid, like a lot of people. I mean, Dan Gurney was always never afraid of trying a new idea. Mickey Thompson was one of those guys too. And when you do that, not every idea is good. And he thought, well, let's build a monocoque funny car. Because monocoque construction, no frame, was coming in the Indy Series, et cetera, and other forms of racing. Great idea, it just didn't work. Whether it was too flexible or whatever, I'm not quite sure. I don't really remember. Mickey was a very, very hands-on guy, just like Foyt, just like Dan Gurney, just like Parnelli. I mean, they were from that era, certain of those people, that they knew as much about the car as they did about driving. And of course, Mickey was one of those guys that drove and also ran a team, built cars, like every one of the other guys I mentioned, Gurney, Foyt, Jones, all drivers, all built cars, all ran teams. Roger Penske, the same way, driver, had cars, Penske cars, and also obviously has a very successful history in racing. So Mickey was quite a guy. He was an amazing guy, and that was just a great memory from that particular day. We used to end up on the same flight going to Indianapolis 500 with Mickey quite a few times over the years, and he'd come on the plane and automatically would start, okay, let's cut cards for money and all that. Because there would be, at one point in time, some of the flights coming out of LA, it would be a real who's who of the group on these flights. I mean, we'd have Mickey, we'd have our buddy Andy Granatelli, my dad and I. I mean, it was unbelievable. And these were commercial flights. And the people that ended up on these flights just by happenstance, you know, they'd be getting autographs. It was really just a lot of fun. It was really a great memory. This next image is a Can-Am. Of course, you know, this is probably Can-Am, and I brought this one in because Can-Am probably holds such a special place in people's memories. And I was there for all of that and photographed it all. And this picture's got Lothar Moshenbacher in the front in a McLaren, then Scooter Patrick in the Alfa, and then Sam Posey is in the Porsche Spyder, and then there's the Ferrari 512 Le Mans type car, which they allowed to run in the Can-Am. They ran the Porsche 917s, you know, and so this is at Riverside. I don't remember what turn this was, but Can-Am was just unbelievable. I mean, no rules, just flat out racing, variety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, the Sports Car Club of America, through the infliction of wrong rules, et cetera, basically killed the series. And it was everybody's loss. But boy, I'll tell you, anybody that was around for that, that's why the books sell so well. My good friend Pete Lyons has written numerous books on the Can-Am. A lot of images that are in my archive are in those books. And he's done a fantastic job. He's become like the torchbearer for the Can-Am history.
It's really fascinating, and so much innovation during the Can-Am years.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they were really pushing the envelope with every aspect of car design.
Well, look at it, was a big part of the development of McLaren.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then of course McLaren also was in Formula One. But it was a big part of Bruce McLaren's development of that brand, which has now morphed into building cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the F1, you know, history and all that. But, you know, and Bruce was killed, what, in I think 1970, if I remember right, at Goodwood when he was testing. And
I think he was 32 years old.
Yeah. It was, you know, should not have happened. Actually, more drivers have been killed, quote, when they've been out just testing, not in race conditions, and people really, I think, realize many times. And testing is very dangerous. You know, you think, well, they're just going to go out and test, and there's no other cars on the track and all that. Wow, there's been a lot of drivers have lost their life that way.
And I think in McLaren's case, part of the rear body came off, you know, some of the aero kit.
Right.
And it made the car completely unstable.
Right.
And that was that era, right? I mean, when they were really starting to experiment with aerodynamics more so than they had before.
Yeah, well, you know, they had wing failures. Jacques and Rindt, you know, had a car failure during the Italian Grand Prix on a Lotus. You know, Lotuses were notoriously spindly built. You know, I mean, Colin Chapman definitely has received his share over the years of criticism for building lightweight cars. They called it adding lightness. And but then again, you know, you had a guy like Dan Gurney who saw the strength of the Lotus and brought him to Indianapolis with Ford. And, you know, I mean, you look at those Lotus Indy cars that a guy like Dan Gurney and Jim Clark drove, and then later Parnelli Jones and A.J. Foyt, when they got them the next year, those cars were really, really amazingly spindly for that speed. I mean, again, it takes a certain mental attitude and a huge amount of courage to drive those cars. And it's not a matter of a driver being ignorant to the risk. They fully know the risk. They just accept it, and it's a calculated risk. So this next picture is of Carlos Reuterman, who I really loved that guy. I thought he was just a dashing, dark South American. He was a good-looking guy, and he was a great driver. And of course, he was on the Ferrari team when this picture was shot at the Long Beach Grand Prix. And one of my favorite all-time Ferrari F1 cars, the 312s, got that set-out front wing. I just loved it. And Lauda later, drove, and I loved that era of F1. I was happy that I was around for that. During the era, the Tyrrell 6-wheel car, the Project 34, they called it. There's just so much difference in look. Brabham, Gordon Murray's Brabham had that unusual look. Today,
the early Williams cars.
Yeah, the early, Walter Wolf, okay, with Jody Scheckter. The car that James Hunt, the Hesketh. Okay? Yeah. Lord Hesketh's car. It was all over the board with those cars. And today, now, most F1 cars they're so exactly alike. This is the thing. If you want to find the slipperiest low CG and low amount of drag of a car, ultimately, really, you could say, there's basically probably just that one design, and we would all be driving the same looking car on the street. This is, but that's boring. It's boring. So this car is just really cool, and this is shot at a time in Long Beach when it was in the early years, and the city had not morphed into the beautiful city that it is today. It was a hodgepodge of, as the joke goes, adult theaters and this and that.
Kind of gritty.
Yeah, it was really gritty, and it was a Navy town. They had the big Navy yard down there, and a lot of people from Iowa had migrated out to Long Beach. But a lot of people don't even realize this today, and that was where they retired to, and all that. But it had a lot of color in that era. It had a lot of color. Now, look at what's happened to the city thanks to the race being a big part of that is gorgeous. Long Beach is a gorgeous city now. The condos they're building down there and all that, it's gorgeous. But this captures that era. And Chris Pook, and Dan Gurney, they were the founders of the race, both good friends. And we ran a car in the very first Long Beach Grand Prix, which was a race for Formula 5000 in '75. It was a test race to prove that they could do it. Then they would get F1, and we ran our Formula 5000 car in there. So I've been to every Long Beach since day one, and
wow.
It's changed a lot over the years. They put together a great team for that event that lasted a long time. But in the first year, they're learning. They're moving in the K-rail. A lot of what they developed had never been done before. So they were definitely doing something that was new. And so they had to come up with this all on their own. And so we were set up our pit with our Formula 5000 car, and a guy comes up, and they're looking for pit space, and there is no pit space anywhere. And the guy comes up and says, hey, can our team, I'm with this team, could we get some space from you? And we said, sure. We cut our pit space down and opened up area for these guys to move in. Well, the guy that came to us and asked us was a guy by the name of Dan Haggerty, who would later become known as Grizzly Adams. But he was not Grizzly Adams at this point in his life. He was just Dan Haggerty. And it was just weird. We always remembered that for years, until Dan passed away. And he was a great guy. And he never forgot that, we didn't have to. There was just no room. They could have been out in the back 40, as they say. And we said, Dad, no, you guys do it here, just as fellow racers. So the early days were really fun. A lot of events when they start out are very innocent and very fun, and then as they become more successful, things get real serious and it changes. And it's just the nature of things, you know what I mean?
Was it Dan Gurney's idea in the first place?
Well, he was involved with Chris. It was a nice book written. I think it's went to great lengths. Chris was the one, I think, that really said, though, let's try and do it in Long Beach. But having Dan having Dan involved, it would have never happened if you didn't have a guy named Dan Gurney. It just would never have happened. Dan was the real deal, highly respected, communicated it, well, and everybody knew. I mean, he had run for president, at least
the car
and driver candidate.
Yeah.
Right. And that was David E. Davis came up with that idea. That was a joke. David E. Davis, who was the editor of Car and Driver at that time, was a former advertising copywriter. So it was not far out of his deal, and you can still buy those bumper stickers today at the All American Racers website. And some people wish that Dan would have run for president, but I can tell you this, he was a very, very good American, and that's why All-American Racers. He was very proud of the fact of, he took an Impala, to England and smoked them with the Impala so much that they outlawed the car. Okay, so anyway.
I mean, isn't that also why he called his car the Eagle?
Yeah, very much, yeah. And the design is... Dad designed the logo, and they came up with the idea for the eagle snout on the early cars that Lynn Terry designed,
And it was really timely, too, because a few years after the Gurney Eagle was created, the Eagle was landing on the moon.
Right, yeah. I mean, what's more American than the eagle, the bald eagle, yeah. So this next shot, to bring us up into contemporary time, the Ford GT. The second coming of the Ford. I mean, this goes back to Ford's original total performance program back in the 60s when Ford was starting to come out of that era where the car companies agreed not to be involved in racing and they were feeding stuff. You'd see the stock cars and they'd have such and such Ford dealer on the side panel. They just throw the dealer's name on there. It was a factory program, but they were playing this game, Chevrolet, Ford, they all were playing this game. Well, when they finally came out and then Ford decided to go to Le Mans, and that was all due to the failed Ferrari purchase. And, of course, the movie Ford versus Ferrari covers that pretty well. I mean, it's a beautiful film, and there's some things that are a little bit inaccurate, but for the most part, it covers the story very well. And I'm proud of the film, and I think they did a great job. A lot of friends worked on it. One of Dan's sons, Alex Gurney, worked on it. A good friend of mine, Tony Hunt, famous racer, he was one of the stunt drivers on it. And so anyway, a lot of friends worked on it. Derek Hill, Phil Hill's son. But anyway, when Ford decided to come back and run the program was really great. And of course, these cars, they ended up winning in class, not overall, because Le Mans changed. But these cars represented, and I particularly like this car because it's got more of a heritage livery. I liked the red, white, and blue cars, but I loved towards the end of the program when they started changing the paint jobs to a little bit more of the traditional look. And of course, they were proving that the EcoBoost, the 6-cylinder motor, which was very capable on the track. You have to be quite honest, it's really not real sexy to listen to. It's sort of not like the roar of the V8 or the Ferrari or
V12.
But I tell you, these cars were the real deal, and they proved the Ford 6-cylinder had a completely different sound than the Porsche 6-cylinder, which is more of a scream. But anyway, that picture was shot at Road America, which is truly one of the greatest racetracks in the world, let alone America. It's the natural park of speed, the nickname, and it's beautiful in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. This last image, definitely contemporary, shot a few months ago at the Long Beach Grand Prix in the hairpin. And that's of Joseph Newgarden in one of the Penske cars. This original technique was really started by a guy by the name of Rainer Schlegelmilch, and famous Grand Prix racer and a good friend of many of my other photographer friends, Pete Byro, Von Trebera, Ed Ingles, etc. Rainer shot F1 from literally the beginning up until just few years ago. Unbelievable, great photographer. He was one of the first to do the shots in the corner and doing a zoom at the same time, and created this technique which is iconic. This hairpin at Long Beach is one of the last places where you can actually literally almost lean out over the car as a photographer. They limit access to that. In the very beginning years of the F1, we could do that everywhere on the track. I mean, there were not catch fences. It was the wide open spaces. And I might add, I only can really truly say I only know of one or two photographers that have died in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of races that have been conducted. And the only one I can clearly remember was a newspaper photographer, not a regular motorsports photographer, that was shooting a motorcycle race up at one of the 1 mile tracks in Northern California. It was Sacramento, San Jose, I don't remember which. And they were using hay bales around the outside of the track, and the guy went to reload his camera and took his eyes off, and he didn't pull away from the track. All things that any of us that shoot it all the time would know, and turned his back, and motorcycle, crashed, came off the track and hit him and killed the guy. And it should have never happened. But, look, my dad, one of the things my dad taught me, because he had seen people get killed at racetracks in any number of ways. He saw a flagman one night flagging a motorcycle race down on the track. When they'd be right on the track, motorcycle racer came by with a handlebar and sliced the guy right on his stomach and killed him. And so my dad always told me about watch out for loose tires, which you can see that on the freeway, by the way. And all those other, always try to put something between you. When I've shot off-road, because off-road is car's coming down a dirt road, it's going like this, that car could end up anywhere. And by the time that it comes at you, it's too late. And so if you aren't up on a rock or behind a rock where you can dump behind, or behind a vehicle at minimum, I've always got something between me and that high-speed moving object. And I've done my share of risky photography. I've hung out the side of a helicopter with nothing but a lap belt, okay? And I've ridden in the back of pickups with no safety harness, shooting off-road cars or drag cars or road race. Now they have all these really nice safety harnesses. You're tethered in and all that, which I'm all in favor of. But back before we had that, in order to get some of these unique shots, you had to take some risks. And I've done all that, and I'm, knock on wood, I made it through without a scar. So, but anyway, so it's changed over the years.
Well, those are terrific images. 10 images that kind of encapsulate your career as a photographer.
My photographs are like my children, okay? I've never met one that I didn't like, okay?
All right, once again, edjusticejr.com. You can learn more. The book is called Legacy of Justice, available on Amazon. Thanks again, Ed.
Thank you. Great to be with you today. Thank you so much.